What's up, Bitcoiners? That sun's pretty up. I checked. The best news of the day. Bitcoin's running. All that's left to do is have a coffee. Talk about what's new. Aloha. Kevin, I have PTSD. I thought I read audio at first. I was like, God damn it. May have solved the problem. We'll see. It's really hard to test because it seems to take time for the audio to have trouble. What I've done today might work. We're going to keep working at it, right? We're going to keep working to get this quality up, right? Once we can get the quality up, we're going to take some chances and grow the channel quite a bit. But still working on some of these technical things. It's got to be easy. It's not just about accomplishing it once. We got to make it easy. So what's going on today? Right? What's all the news? What's funny? What's the funniest things out there? 2023 looks no different from 2022 so far. Yeah, but that's good news. That's good news, right? 2022, if you choose to see it as a catastrophic year, it certainly was catastrophic for the fiat system, for the previous era, for the previous epoch. So in some ways, 2023 is a continuation of catastrophe for the fiat world. But us Bitcoiners, right, we're going to talk today about how things are getting great and how one of the most important human developments for our own personal individual evolution is right in front of us. Peter Zeihan, we're going to talk about Peter Zeihan today. He might be one of the first candidates for this. We'll see. We'll see if Peter Zeihan has the ability. But first, let's talk about the fakest news we can find, right? It's a Sunday morning. We like fake news. Morning from Canada, thought police on the rise. Well, Canada is a wasteland. I'm sorry to say. Hello, my name is. As a Canadian, I've been sort of laughing at that shithole for a while now, pardon my language. I love Canadians, but Canada as a contract, as a deal between different states, failure. I am one of the first Anglo-Quebec separatists you're going to find. I'm a total separatist now. I come from Quebec. Now, my only problem with separation in Quebec, if you guys aren't aware, you definitely aren't aware of the political situation in Canada to this minute of a detail. You've probably heard before that Quebec wanted to separate. The only reason I'm not 2 feet first on Quebec separation is because it's the separatist party is socialist, more or less. And they just focus on socialism. And then their whole point is we can be more socialist if we're our own country. So if there was sort of a middle ground, let's denude the federal government of power and not try and gain power ourselves as individuals, right? My problem with Quebec separation, my only problem with Quebec separation is the people who want it simply want to be kings and queens or presidents or whatever. They want to go to the UN. Right? I want to seat at the UN. Wow, it'd be so great, right? So they want it for all the wrong reasons. They want it for all of yesterday's reasons. If ever anyone in Quebec embraces limited government, a type of libertarian approach to federalism where the states actually have the power. So the thing I love about Quebec is that it does fully exercise its states' rights and rarely allows the federal government to impede unless the federal government is paying them off, right? So that's basically how Canada works. Justin Trudeau's dad invented the blueprint. His dad, Pierre Trudeau, invented the blueprint, which is to take money from Canada and bribe Quebec to stay. And it's worked so far. And so I'm for that. I'm for ripping Canada off, if you will. As much as I love Canadians and I hate seeing them lose money towards Quebec, it's their own fault. If they don't wake up to it, then I'm not going to do anything. I don't pay Canadian taxes. I'm not for Canada and paying taxes. That's my #1 tax strategy is to not give $1 to Canada. Not one. They don't deserve it. 0. They get nothing. I don't even get my gas in Canada. If I have to pay goods and services tax on consumable items there, I think of each of those dollars as a loss, as an actual loss, like I'm losing, I'm giving to the enemy. So, I don't do that. But let's get to the fakest news of the day. So everyone knows libs of TikTok, right? Libs of TikTok. The actual character, after being doxxed by Taylor Lorenz, is now out in the open. We know who it is. She's been on Tucker Carlson recently. But nevertheless, the innovation libs of TikTok came up with, which is just share videos where people get to speak in their own words, right? The P-Man ban, separation in Quebec was based on language. English-speaking people would have been in a bad way. They are in a bad way. P-Man Van, they are in a bad way. That's primarily how I ended up becoming an anarcho-capitalist and someone who's very interested in tearing down government barriers. I grew up as an English Quebecer. We were one of the first populations in the world that it was just totally okay to um, be bigoted against. Really, I mean, it's just bigotry, and it was done with the tacit approval of Canada. That's why I don't forgive Canada for most of this stuff. Forgive is the wrong word. It's not. I forgive them, of course. There's no. I don't expect Canada to change. I don't need them to change. I just know that for most of my life, I saw a brain drain. I saw the most talented people leaving. I saw demographics getting hollowed out, and I knew why. It was because of ambitious politicians, and certainly it was not only a language thing; it's an ethnic thing, right? So, as a Quebecer who speaks perfect French, I mean, perfect. I went to school in France. I went to law school in French. The whole law school I did was in French. So I can speak French. There's no trouble at all. I speak French as well as I speak English if I have enough daily practice. Right now, I would say that's not the case because I don't speak French very often. But I could land in France tomorrow and just blah blah blah, and in 2 days I'm dreaming in French and thinking in French and blah blah blah. So I went to university in France and law school in Quebec, and most of my education before that was bilingual. So I did all my math up until college in French. I did science. I still don't really even know biological terms very well in English. Sometimes I'll just say it in French and expect that the Latin origin translates into English, but I'm often wrong if it's not the case, right? If the word comes from German origin, I'll say something with an English accent and it'll be totally wrong because I learned it all in French. There's some things I don't really know how to express myself perfectly in English. Of course, I would know the words. It's rare that those things happen. So you can even tell the Quebec situation by I met a sniper rifle guy once, an Irish actual assassin, right? And he had been after the Ireland stuff. He had been contracted over in Kosovo in the '90s, and I met him during an election in Quebec City the night the separatist Socialist Party was wiped out, pretty much for good. It was 2007. They haven't really come back since. And he told me, so remember, he's Irish Catholic. If the whole thing was about the church and Canada, sorry, the crown and Canada and all these things, like they often said it was, he would have been the first one to join. I mean, it's the same fight, right? But of course, he comes speaking English, and they didn't want anything to do with him, right? They're like, "What are you good for?" Ooh, sorry about that. Motorcycle. It was always an ethnic thing. As someone who lived in Quebec City, I would have to. People would say, "Where are you from?" And I'd say, "Oh, I'm from Montreal." And they'd say, "Well, where are you really from?" And I'd say, "Well, you got me. I'm from the Vermont border with Quebec." No, 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 but where are you really from? And I'm speaking to them in French. I'm like, what are you talking about? Where am I really from? Right. That's why I get when some immigrants, they're like, why do people ask me where I'm really from, even though I was born in America, if you look Chinese or something. And I'm pretty sympathetic to that because I live that in my home area all the time. Where are you really from? And I'm like, well, my dad is from Europe, but my mom and all the generations back are from here. What are you talking about? Like, what are you talking about? They wouldn't be able to accept it. So for those reasons, I am a Quebec separatist. Now, I don't want whatever happens to Quebec after to just be a socialist country. That's why I'm not for it as it is. But if it was about renegotiating the federal contract and how the states operate, and it was about reducing the power of the federal government, I'm in. I'm 100% in. Especially if it is about destroying the Bank of Canada. Right? We don't like the Bank of Canada. Continue to think that the Bank of Canada, in the next cycle, Bitcoin will pick on it, let's say, right? It's going to be a major weakness because Canada, for reasons we're going to talk about today, is one of the most blind by their ego countries in the world. I mean, they're really blind. They think their degrees are worth something. They think their credentials are actually valuable. And they believe, when it comes to money, for example, it's the perfect example. I think a lot of Canadians with the Bank of Canada they ultimately believe that because they look like Americans and have the same accent and speak like Americans, that somehow the privilege of the US dollar extends to the Canadian dollar. They're not right. Their degrees, none of their trappings are going to protect them. I continue to think that as a heavyweight like practice fight, Bitcoin versus a national currency. There's a few along the way, but I think the first heavyweight bout Bitcoin will take will be a lot like what Soros did to the Bank of England when he broke it. I think that the Bank of Canada is in a very vulnerable position because of their egos. That's all. That's the point of today's show. Actually, we're going to get into that. Their egos, the stuff that's happening with Jordan Peterson, the College of Psychologists, and all these people who have called to him to get social media training. Right? These folks are the reason why the Bank of Canada and all of Canadian savings are sitting ducks. They're sitting ducks. They sold all their gold. Right? We're going to talk today. China just bought way more gold again. But Canada believes they have engineered their way out of this trouble. They think that all these people that are working for the Bank of Canada actually know what they're doing, have a plan, and are implementing it with strict surgical precision. Right? That's actually what is in a lot of these people's heads. Peter Zeihan being a great example. We're going to get to him in a second. But that's what's going on in Canada. And they don't understand that the American dollar's privileges were won in World War II. Canada did really well in World War II as well, but they didn't pay for the reconstruction of the world. They didn't create a monopoly in the energy market for the US dollar. They did none of those things. They just look and talk like Americans. So will that save them? Definitely not. Definitely not. There's math involved in this. There's no longer people's perceptions. There is a balance sheet for the Bank of Canada. There are liabilities and there are weaknesses. And when Bitcoiners and all of the plebs and all of these people understand what's going on, I picture a Normandy type event where people flood in and sink a country, right? There's a lot of treasure to be gained by shorting a whole country. And I think Canada's prime on the list. It's the smallest of the rich countries. It was only included in the rich country group, the G7 and all that, because of Justin Trudeau's dad. Justin Trudeau's dad engineered that. And the way he engineered that was the Americans needed backup. The Americans had Japan in the G7 to help them, and they had England in the G7 to help them, they thought. And the rest was Europe. And if Europe had an opinion in a three country situation. So the other three were Germany, France, and Italy, right? So Germany, France, and Italy. And then you just had the two Anglo countries, America and England, right? And so then you had Japan with them, but that was 3 versus 3. So Canada was brought in as a tiebreaker. That's the only reason when they were ever included. The top 6 had a much more, well, America beyond, Japan beyond, but the European 4, England, Germany, France, and Italy, had very similar profiles, roughly 60 million population, 80 in the case of Germany when they reunified, but this was set up before when it was still in the 60 territory. So they all have around 60 million, and they all had very similar GDPs, very similar purchasing powers. And one would imagine they would have been coordinated in some ways, except for the language and the history of America and England made that a natural pivot point. But it wasn't enough for the Americans to guarantee they would be able to manipulate the G7. So who did they invite? This stupid country. And we were there as a tiebreaker and as a scam. And we're not really part of that group in the important way. So certainly have a seat at the table, certainly there, but it's the kids' table. Right, we're not really. It's not like Canada can really tell the G7 what to do, and so that's. Hello, my name is Daniel Smith. Doesn't win the next election, Alberta is done too. Yeah, I think Alberta's. If Alberta had a port, it would already be gone. There's no, and in fact, my reasoning behind why Canada doesn't work comes down to Alberta. Because they don't have a port, they have to coordinate and cooperate with their neighbors, all of whom treat them like shit. They just treat them like total garbage because they're landlocked. So they have had such an unfair go at federalism. And, when I worked for Harper, that was the whole point. That was the Alberta wing trying to take over the country from where I grew up, which is in the Empire on the St. Lawrence, is what I call it, right? And that's really what Canada is. It's this empire on the St. Lawrence with a Pacific port, which is Vancouver. And everything else is about getting the resources so that the people in the empire can sell and get rich. And they did. They're super rich, right? Montreal is an amazing city. It's gorgeous. Toronto, gorgeous, amazing city. But that's been paid for by the rest of Canada. and I don't think they got much. I've been to the hinterlands of Canada. It's disgusting. They're awful places, right? I mean, beautiful, but is Fidel Castro Trudeau's biological father? I don't think so. Maybe. I mean, people say, but I don't. I don't. That's. I mean, they look alike, I guess. I mean, the stranger things have happened, right? Stranger things have happened. It could be. I 100% doubt it. But you never know. You never know, right? We never know. But the pictures are certainly convincing. They're certainly convincing. But I've met people in the family. You know, his half brother from the mother is a big Bitcoiner, right? Trudeau's half brother. Who I've known him for a long, long time, very well. You know, we hung out and partied, and he helped me on the Senate study back in the old days. He was personally friends with Andreas Antonopoulos, and that's how I reached Andreas when I got him to testify in 2014, almost 10 years ago now. And he's a hell of a guy. I mean, he's got personal whatever stuff, and I just like him for who he is. I don't know all the details of his life and all these things, but he had the first ATM in Canada, I think, for Bitcoin, and is definitely not a fan of his brother's politics. And I'll even say this about him: I hung out with him while his brother was still just an MP, but I hung out with him for about a year and a half or something before I even figured it out that it was Justin Trudeau's brother. Before he was prime minister, but he wasn't out there saying, "Oh, it's my brother," and da 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 da. So his his father was not the prime minister. So just so we understand it, it's the mother who got divorced, and then the mother had other children, but it's still a half brother, right? So it's part of the family. And I've never asked him this question, but it would be his mother who would know. So I don't know. We'll see. All right, we missed Moscow time, but we're going to get to it right now. Let's have a sip of coffee and talk about the funny news before we get into the other funny news. So libs of TikTok, right? So libs of TikTok is a great innovation, right? It's just there's no comment. That's what makes the censorship of libs of TikTok so dastardly and so shocking. Because here's a person who doesn't do anything but share, give another amplification to people's own voices. Just because they're stupid, that's not her fault. Libs of TikTok. So the latest crazy thing dropped today, which is that wanting to be skinny is actually racist, right? So this person goes in and does this whole thing where you see the mental gymnastics. Actually, it's rooted in something. Black people are bigger, and I guess that was about over sexualizing big people, and then you don't want to be like the people you've over sexualized. It was gobbledygook, right? So this explanation of her going out there, complete gobbledygook. There's been some funny reactions, and this is one that I think is relevant to our space. Limited Run Games, which is a game platform that I think allows you to. I copied it. Well, anyway, it's a game platform. It sounds like they just take old games and sort of repackage them and remodel them. So Limited Run Games fired their community manager. Why? Only because she followed libs of TikTok. Could you imagine? So it's not even about censoring libs of TikTok. It's gone so far as to censoring people who amplify libs. This isn't even a person who retweeted, just followed. Fired. It's amazing, right? It's amazing. And that whole attitude of basically thinking that that's possible, thinking that censoring people just for following someone else doesn't have incredible ramifications. Like I'd bet this company now will get more publicity than it's ever had, and it'll be negative around this, and people are going to talk about it and wonder why you would fire someone just for liking, or in this case not even liking, just following someone, right? And the whole thing makes me think of and again, this is part of people trying to use TikTok to navigate the world, either mental health, trying to explain things that give them anxiety. They go to TikTok and they get this crazy stuff, and in the end it's just sort of a mind virus, and you start catching people saying complete nonsense, right? And by complete nonsense, you can actually see the cognitive dissonance, right? You can see cognitive dissonance when it's triggered. sounds like gibberish. It always sounds like gibberish. And Peter Zeihan's interview. So Peter Zeihan, a big source on this show, as well as Michael Schellenberger, right? We love Michael Schellenberger, but these are two folks, right? Michael Schellenberger and Peter Zeihan, who suffer from cognitive dissonance when they talk about Bitcoin. How do we know it's cognitive dissonance? Well, if anyone was unaware, Peter Zeihan was on, which I think is great for Peter Zeihan. So Peter Zeihan was on Joe Rogan yesterday, right? Big platform. Not enough people have known Peter Zeihan as far as I'm concerned, right? He has very important information on security at sea, right? He predicted years ago that the United States would no longer police the seas, and that the only reason why we've had this great period of peace and prosperity globally is because America was the sole maritime power and created secure trade lanes for every other country who didn't have to fight for them. So the best way to understand it is China, right? And this he was there really to talk about China. His number one takeaway from the Joe Rogan interview, the one that's gone viral that everyone's talking about, apart from the Bitcoin comment that we're going to talk about in a second, everything that he's talked about is about predicting China's demise. And I think he's on target. I think he was the only one who had that inside view. He said it loudly. He said it clearly. He made predictions for years that China was finished. They only existed in the prosperous context that they had because they lived under the umbrella of American stewardship of the seas. And because America had secured all sea lanes, China got something it had never, ever, ever got before, which was safe, secure access to global markets. They'd never achieved that because of the nature of the Chinese coast. They always had to deal with Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, and all the other places, the Straits of Malacca. So where Singapore is, it's very difficult to run ships through that tight wedge. If someone secures it, you're finished. You're not going to make it. And it's not like the American Pacific and Atlantic coasts where you can just go. Very, very difficult barrier islands, they're called. And that kept them from exporting by sea to the rest of the world for generations. And Japan, in a kind of a similar way, they're kind of tucked away on an island, and they never had the ability to get past some of the maritime powers that were south of them, and therefore created this feudal society in Japan in a couple hundred years ago. And interestingly, right, when you think of America at the end of World War II, it's the countries that were beaten, like Japan, that got the thing they wanted anyway. Right? So Japan certainly lost World War II. It got nuked and smashed and beaten up. But what was the cost of losing the war? Well, the cost of losing the war was not much in the end. America rebuilt it and afforded Japan total access to global markets based on US maritime supremacy. And that's been Peter Zeihan's argument for a long time. His book that he wrote that made him famous on the subject was about what happens when America leaves the maritime sea lane security situation in the world, that everyone will be left fighting for themselves again, and you're not going to get anything like globalized trade any longer. That was an anomaly in history. So that's been Peter Zeihan's argument for a long time, and people thought when he first said it, he was nuts. They said, come on, this was when China was rising, and everyone bought the Larry Summers or whoever else, the Ray Dalio line, right? It's inevitable. China is the next country. It's the next major superpower. Who can stop its population? He was the first guy to say, I don't think so. It's not that simple, right? It's not that simple. And he predicted America would come home as far as the aircraft carriers and ships and security apparatus. Everything would return to the Americas, and they wouldn't really police the rest of the world. Right? He's known for saying that foreign policy, and I agree with this entirely, right? Peter Zeihan entirely right about this, right? That foreign policy for America and Canada is just a sport, right? It's not serious. You don't have to think about it because it doesn't matter. Unless the space thing changes, right? Unless the space thing changes and America can be attacked from space, there is no real attack vector on America and Canada. It's just too big, too secure, and too difficult to really influence. And that means that any interaction with neighbors across the oceans are usually just done for the strategic best interests of the United States, rarely, if ever, done on a survival basis like it would be for Japan or Korea or China or the Philippines or Taiwan or Europe. Europe, of course, always next to other countries. It's always been a battleground because the geography is not great, right? The geography of Europe is mountainous coast on the south, very difficult to move inland. It's nothing like the United States, right? There's no like Mississippi Delta, right? There's no Mississippi River. The greatest agricultural land on earth, protected by two mountain ranges with its own endpoint in the south. The inland waterway, or what do they call it again? The intercoastal waterway, right? By the way, the design of America suggests, if you look at the flat coasts and the channeled intercoastal seaway, suggests some human involvement, by the way. Very difficult, even when you look at the island of New York and you see the straight beaches up and down, very difficult to imagine this was all natural. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the Intercoastal Highway, but go on Google Maps sometime and see just how long it is, right? It goes from basically Chesapeake Bay, so just south of New York City. There is an avenue protected by a barrier island the whole way down Florida. If anyone's been to the beach in Florida, you know that you have to cross a bridge to get onto the beach, track. And the beach track is a series of islands and a strip of land. And there are these drawbridges that allow boats to pass between the mainland and the strip. Cape Canaveral, where they launched the rockets, are launched off of that. Miami Beach is on there, right? Up and down, you'll see it. So I'm not saying ancient civilizations built it, but it looks pretty man-made. I don't know if you've seen how straight it is. Now I know the U.S. Corps of Engineers the Army Corps of Engineers has changed a bit of it and stuff like that. But nevertheless, this is a piece of inherited infrastructure that apparently God made, but is super useful, and no one else has anything like it. As I've understood, because of the Intercoastal Highway, here's a crazy fact: the Intercoastal waterway just on the U.S. East Coast, just the East Coast, right? So just the East Coast, not even anything, not the whole country, not the Caribbean coast, not the Pacific coast, just the U.S. East Coast has more coastline than the entire continent of Africa. Yeah, because it's double, triple, right? They've got this side of the coast, the back side of the waterway, the third one, all the inlets, Chesapeake Bay, all that stuff is doubled up. So there's literally more waterfront property on the U.S. East Coast than there is in all of Africa, the whole continent, the whole thing, up and down, all around. Nuts. So amazing thing about America and its just physical attributes and how different it is from the rest of the world because of this, and how it's almost predetermined that the largest, most powerful country in the world would have come from this physical location. As long as it stays unified and together, right? As of course Lincoln said, right? No one will ever take, as long as America stays together, no one will ever take a peaceful sip of water from the Mississippi River. Nobody. It's not possible, right? To take a peaceful sip of water from the Mississippi River, if you were a belligerent to America under those conditions, right? So that was his prediction. So let's get to Peter Zeihan. So a lot of respect for Peter Zeihan's work. He said yesterday the shocking thing on Joe Rogan, which is that China has the CCP has no more than 10 years left of survival. I'd even give it less, frankly. I'd give it less. But I'm 100% aligned with Peter Zeihan there. 100%, right? 100%. But of course, Peter Zeihan not content with sharing his valuable knowledge about global politics and his predictions. He has to get into Bitcoin, right? And so what does he say? Well, you get Joe Rogan saying, what about Bitcoin? Da, 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 and he does his usual thing. I've seen him do it a bunch of times now, right? He laughs because he's so smart, right? He's so smart. He is so smart. He's a smart guy. And Brandon says, and you can take boats way up the Mississippi. Yeah, not only the Mississippi, you can take the boats up all the other Ohio River and all the other ones that combine with it. So there's you can see some of these maps. What's the name of the book again? Visualizing Information. It's an amazing book. I can't remember the name. It's a design book that was written in the 80s. And geez, I wish I can remember the name. Everyone has been inspired by it in design. And he includes these river maps that show just how long rivers are. So it straightens each river. So you can compare them all, right? The St. Lawrence River and all these ones. And when you see the Mississippi, it's got to go like 2 or 3 rungs, and there's nothing else in the world even close. It's amazing to see. I wish I can remember the name of that book. It's great. Anyway, I'll find it and I'll share it on Twitter or something, or in the next show. It's an excellent book. A big focus on Japanese maps, which I'm a collector of. I collect maps, by the way. I'm a map collector. It's one of the few things I collect. My theme of my collection is cities I've lived in. So I collect ancient maps, old maps, any map that is beautiful, right? And so of the cities I've lived in a lot of cities in my life, so I have some really cool maps. But the prizes of my collection are the Japanese maps, just because they're so pretty and interesting and different and totally unique, and the spatial stuff is different. And this book sort of explains why they're unique. And I was already a collector of these maps before I saw the book, and just love it. So what does Zeihan do, right? So Zeihan goes on Joe Rogan yesterday, and what does he say, right? He says he's trying to explain why Bitcoin can't take over, right? And his explanation is this: that the money supply has to the money supply must increase. Otherwise, you're going to get what he called monetary inflation, right? I can't even understand what he's talking about, right? So he says that the money supply will go up and the economy won't work because you'll have something that I've never even heard of, right? I'm trying to get the actual, you get monetary inflation. If currency is locked into a specific number, you get monetary inflation. What the fuck does that mean? Yeah. So Cardophile Nolan, they call him. Yeah, we love maths. Yeah. So that's cognitive dissonance, guys. That's what it looks like, right? When you start spouting gibberish, when it makes no sense, when you have to say, like, Peter, what are you talking about, right? Like monetary inflation because it's locked into a certain number, right? It's locked into it. Now, what he doesn't get here is that, and everyone in Bitcoin has talked about this a bunch of times, right? What having an inflation and money supply actually does hide the beneficial effects of capitalism, right? So capitalism is supposed to find a better and cheaper way to produce X. And once it finds a better and cheaper way to produce X, everyone copies it, everyone goes in, everyone models that same system until another one is found that's even better, right? So in real capitalism, you would see prices come down of items as efficiencies were gained. You would see the cost of a car, for example, come down over time because they found a better way to make it. You'd be incentivized to find a better way to make it. You would try and find a way to beat your competitor in price for whatever reason, right? And now those forces exist all around us. We see them every day, right? Those things still happen despite our inflation and targeted inflation at 2%, right? Those things still happen. Yet they're very difficult to observe because, and can not happen, right? They can look like it's happening, but actually not happen in the end. You think you're getting more for your money, but you're not, right? And the reason is inflation hides and doesn't force you to choose the better system. You're able to find a way when you have these 2% inflation targets. It ends up finding a way for shared efficiencies to not be shared, right? You find your own bespoke way. And that's where inflation ought to be observed, that's where deflation ought to be observed, right? That's where purchasing power through the benefits of capitalism should come out, right? If there's a better way to make a car, then you would copy that process and cars would all come down as a result, right? That's in a world of the Bitcoin standard, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see the price of houses, you're going to see the price of cars come down as efficiencies are shared through the system. And your purchasing power is going to go up. So it's all about purchasing power. Inflation, it doesn't matter if purchasing power goes up. If you can get more for your stuff, then that's great, right? And now Indemnity says here that Michael Schellenberger versus Pomp was hard to watch. Indeed, it's the same story. These are people who I think are just trying to get Bitcoin energy and get our audience, cause a bit of outrage, and they see the benefit in that, and they see the traction in that, and get some profile. But these are people that can't even differentiate between crypto and Bitcoin, right? They can't even differentiate between that. I hear them when they give these interviews, they'll say crypto and Bitcoin, and without any understanding about the division in those things that we are all aware of because we are in this environment all the time. And now I'll tell you, I don't hate crypto at all, but I can tell you what crypto is to me. Crypto is a subset of a small category about finance, about uh, raising money, capital, right? These are sort of little important fields, maybe not even little, small importance, maybe significant, right? Um, but as a Bitcoiner, I disagree with the extent of the occupation of our economy, right? I don't want financial engineers everywhere. So all these products that crypto people are copy pasting over from the finance world, from Wall Street, while it's fun to experiment and it's fun to look at it and see if there's innovation there, I think the overall size of that in our economy, the overall role of Wall Street, I think it's something like so. Not talking about the money invested, not talking about um, 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 assets under management, just talking about the cost of investing. So the fees that the banks and the funds and all these other folks, the wealth managers actually raise is something like 7% of US GDP, right? It's a huge number. And that's just the cost of getting into it, right? So, and we have here Daniel saying crypto is for grifters. Some, yeah, some. I'd say it's flooded with grifters. There's no doubt about that. There are a few sincere people there, though. Maybe you might disagree with their worldview in the sense that, like I do, right? I don't think Wall Street should be 130 IQs with a Series 7 license, and now the new addition of computer science engineering and running nodes added to that so that you can quant trade. Like that's not the future I'm working for, right? And I'd say most crypto people think that that's the future. Right? Crypto people think that's the future. Now, all this to say, I do think there will be some useful things out of crypto. It's all experimental, 100% experimental. It is consumer technology, right? It's consumer technology. So a faster crypto chain can beat another faster crypto chain, I think, right? I believe that. But none of it is like informing a worldview. It's all just toys. It's all little protocols that might help you do a small thing that might not even be significant in the future, like capital raising for an idea, right? It allows you to do all these little things. So in my mind, it's a subcategory of the world of speculation and investments. You know, and to the extent that there are grifters and scammers in it, at 99%, right? It's filled and inundated with those. And even someone like myself, who's been in this industry for a long, long time, I've rarely touched crypto. Rarely. I mean, I've worked for it, I've been paid in it, but it's not something that I've ever been that interested in because I come from the era before any of this stuff was around. And I've always seen Bitcoin as informative of a worldview and a complete change in society. And that makes the relevance of one versus the other the same as the Bible versus, what's, like libs of TikTok. No, not even the Bible versus a magazine, right? Like the Bible is kind of more relevant than a magazine, right? Magazines have stuff in them that are shiny and glossy and you flip through the pages, but you forget it the minute you walk away and you don't really care and none of it sticks with you. None of it resonates inside of you. Bitcoin, like the Bible, can resonate deep inside of you and change your entire life. And I don't think any of that is capable. I speak to all kinds of Ethereum folks all the time. And just ask them questions, and they just don't even imagine the world is going to change. They just think that if they change Wall Street to get rid of banks, the whole world will just continue on in the way that it is, and we won't really see a fundamental change. Bitcoin is about flipping reality upside down, all of it, everything, right? And I never put them in the same category. But people like Peter Zeihan and people like Michael Schellenberger can't see the difference. They think of it all as the same. That's what I see anyway. And when you hear their excuses about this, that is what cognitive dissonance looks and sounds like, right? It sounds like gibberish. Michael Schellenberger, watching that interview, it's just gibberish. None of it even makes sense. I tried to stop and make sense of it, but it is painful. It is painful, right? Um, P-Man Van, there are just too many scams, and it outshines any possible beneficial products. Yeah, I believe that. Yeah. I've never given anyone advice to go play crypto. That's for sure, right? I've always said, even someone like myself who would see all of the founders and the people, I even said I wouldn't get involved in this. I've never been involved in it, right? Because it's not just that it's complicated. It's not just that it's complicated. You don't understand anyone's motivation. You don't know what game they're playing. With Bitcoin, you know what everyone is playing, right? We are all playing the game of World War III, and we want to upend the system, and we want to change everything. Now, the crypto people will say, oh, we've got to change the banks, and we got to change the publishers, and it's sort of a one-off on each of them, and none of it makes sense collectively. So, there you go. They are building up our repository of game theory outcomes. Yeah, and I will say, and this is another thing that I do appreciate crypto for. I will say this, all right? I've always been a small blocker. I've always been a reverse soft fork upgrade. That's what I prefer, because I understand Bitcoin, and I've understood this from the beginning, that this is what I learned about. My blind spot when I entered the industry was cryptography. And I learned enough about cryptography to understand that it shouldn't be confused with consumer electronics and consumer technology. In fact, the thing that makes Bitcoin valuable is that it doesn't change, and that it is resistant and resilient. It is not Silicon Valley, fail fast and break things. I don't want that. Right? This is not a video game. There's no patch you can ship 2 weeks later in case something goes wrong. This is how we count our world around us. And the more conservative the system, the more secure the system, and that's all that counts. Security is everything. I'll tell you right now, if Bitcoin ever has even one crack, you got to get out. It's broken, right? You got to leave right away. But luckily, nothing's cracked, nothing's broken, and we're doing great. That's why we're here. We're here because it hasn't broken. If it breaks, get the heck out. I'll tell you on the show right away. That's why we start every show, right? If Bitcoin isn't running one day, we've got other things to talk about, a lot of other things to talk about, right? But Bitcoin every day, every 10 minutes, tick, 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 tock, tick, tock, right? We're doing great. And that's all that matters. And that's why it doesn't have to evolve. And that's why it's resisted any chain that's been faster and stronger and better. This isn't consumer technology. It's not consumer technology. We confuse technology with consumer technology because that's all we've seen in our lives. All of it's been made for consumers. But when you get into the world of cryptography, you have to get into the world of adversarial thinking. And if you're not in the world of adversarial thinking, you're not imagining what the other person could do, because it's an unfair fight, then you're going to lose, right? It's an unfair fight because in cryptography, as someone who built, not me, but as Satoshi built Bitcoin, you had to think of every possible scenario of destroying it. And if you missed even one, if there was one little mistake you made and the system broke, the whole thing breaks. That's what makes it an unfair fight. And therefore, the conservative approach is great. And so here's where the crypto benefit is there. Right? You want to be able to experiment, and you want to be able to break things, because eventually, and this is a little bit about what the game theory point that Brandon just made comes down to, is that if we don't experiment on other chains to find out what eventually one day might be useful to Bitcoin, then we're going to be doing a disservice to Bitcoin. You need things that you can break on the side. And I've always thought of Ethereum, for example, when it first came out, as an experimental platform where I didn't care if it broke. I didn't care if it got hacked. I didn't care if it got smashed. It is the same as Dogecoin, right? I don't care. Like, it doesn't matter to me. I've never thought Bitcoin or Ethereum would ever go beyond. I was selling Ethereum at $10 because I had earned it in the early days doing a job and had some Ethereum, and I saw $10. Whoa, wow, just get rid of it. Amazing, because I couldn't imagine it going higher than that. Of course I was wrong. Of course I was wrong, right? But I don't mind being wrong about that. I think eventually it will adhere to what I believe to be the inevitable result. It's useless. It's a place to experiment. It's experimental technology, and the benefit is in experimenting. But I think in the case of Ethereum, we've learned enough, and there's other chains, and they've learned stuff, and there's information out there that's relevant, useful, maybe not even today, but the degree to which it's useful is not like if we look at the market cap of the whole industry, it's not that, right? It's not like half. It's not half equally as a collectivity. All of crypto is not as useful as just Bitcoin. I don't think I've never thought that, right? It's like 2%, right? 3%. That's small, right? That's small. But we've learned stuff from this other field, this other experiment, this niche category of crypto. But what folks just can't get their mind around is that they're different. Right? We know on this show it's different. People who come and spend time in the industry understand the difference, but it's not widely socialized. Right? Hammersaw says, Bitcoin is encrypted data with provable digital scarcity, hard money. Crypto is Wall Street and VC scammer, pump and dump, wire fraud, digital trash. Yeah, that's true, Hammer. I'm not arguing with that at all. I couldn't understand how the guy that gets nuclear and wrote Apocalypse Never, that undid the false narrative surrounding nuclear energy, was regurgitating all the false narrative about Bitcoin. It's disappointing to me too, Indemnity. I've been trying to get him at my events for years, and I'm still trying. I wrote to Pomp immediately after that interview and said, let's redo this on stage in Miami, May 18th to 20th. And what I'll do is I'll bring someone from the energy field from Texas. And that I think would corner Schellenberger, because I still think Schellenberger converted is useful, just like I still think Zeihan converted is useful. I'm not totally dismissing them for the future, because what happens when someone like Zeihan or Schellenberger change their mind, and these are people, this is why I still have time for them. These are people capable of changing their mind, right? Which is a rarity. There's not a lot of people in the world like that. And I still listen to Bill Maher, for example, as a liberal pundit. He's one of the last liberal pundits I still listen to, not because I value his opinions, really, only because I think he is someone who can actually change his mind in real time, live in front of everyone. Most people's egos won't allow them to do that, right? Most people's egos will just force cognitive dissonance. That's what we're going to talk about today, right? That's the point of today's episode. That ego, because you can't suppress it sometimes, will help trigger your cognitive dissonance. And that's where you get Schellenberger, and that's where you get Zeihan so far. But I do think these are people capable of changing their mind. There's not a lot like that in the world. And if they do change their mind and they model it to the world, very valuable, right? So I've spoken with Schellenberger a bunch about bringing him to my events and things like that. I've been after him for a while. And he's always been honest. Like, I don't like your industry. I don't like what you're doing. And maybe he said, and da 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 da. So I've had an idea this was going on for a while. But in my mind, if you do it live on stage, right? Basically, it's like religious conversion, right? If you can model it with someone, and then you don't have to argue after. Like, I don't like arguing to convince someone of Bitcoin. Arguing won't do it, right? No one changes their mind from an argument. It just never happens, or so rarely happens. But you can get someone to open their own eyes to something, and once they do that, they are capable of changing their mind. And I think Schellenberger, Zeihan are folks that can do that. They're not there yet, but today's point is why are these people even in this position in the first place, right? And years ago, Alan Farrington. So I was one of the first people to reach out to Eric Weinstein along the similar boat. He was bitching about Bitcoin one day, and this was years ago. This was in 2018, maybe. And I started talking to Eric Weinstein before anyone, right? And I said, Eric, you're screwing up here, man. You're not getting it. So I invited him to New York City. We did a talk. It's been lost to time. I don't know where it is. CoinDesk filmed it, and it was right on Broadway. I saw Eric Weinstein at Bitcoin 2022 in Miami, and I had a laugh saying, we closed down Broadway because it was one of the last shows on Broadway before COVID. And he's like, you're right, we did, because we rented a Broadway stage for it. It was a great show. We discussed at the time, Ter de Meester's Dutch Revolution paper had come out that weekend. And I used the Dutch paper that Ter wrote as the agenda of my talk with Eric. And it was great, right? So I reached out to Eric in those early days. And if you remember, Eric got into trouble not long after, during the lockdowns, when he was, basically dismissing Bitcoin and saying, oh, it's not going to do gauge theory or something. And if you remember, the great, I'd say the great, right? He's one of my favorite writers, Alan Farrington 32, if you don't follow him. Alan Farrington came out and said, what makes people like this sound so stupid? Why do the smartest people like Eric Weinstein say the dumbest things about Bitcoin? Right? Why is that? And his excuse or his explanation here, I saved it the way I meant to. His explanation was the following, right? Being smart doesn't really matter. In fact, it could well be a handicap. I'm reminded of Robert Nozick's essay, Why Do Intellectuals Oppose Capitalism? I won't repeat the entire argument here. Readers can bookmark the link above and blah, blah, blah. But the gist of it is that people whose profession or primary intellectual pursuits consist of wordsmithery, as Nozick calls it, competitively putting forward essentially verbal arguments in the hope of enacting influence, seem inclined to find unfair and unjust the dynamic in which this gets you nowhere. They are used to central planning in the classroom, in which rewards are dished out on the basis of perceived merit, i.e. politics, and there is no anarchy and chaos of the marketplace. So far, this probably doesn't sound like Weinstein at all. So he's saying he doesn't do this oppose capitalism or he's not a wordsmither, he is a numbersmith. But what he's saying here is that intellectuals tend to have grand and all-encompassing theories, that it is entirely within their power to shape and perfect, and which are constructed such that they are essentially unfalsifiable. In the appropriate intellectual domain, this isn't even a bad thing necessarily. But of course, in the economics in real life, it is a highly inappropriate domain. And what he goes on to say is that Bitcoin is a microcosm of capitalism, and the intellectual response to Bitcoin is a microcosm of Nozick's argument. And I think that's really the way to explain it. That's why you end up getting these nonsensical cognitive dissonance responses, because the whole orientation remains politics. It remains the order of the classroom. It remains what you've been trained to elicit, which is a reaction to your intelligence, right? So when you see Peter Zeihan saying China's done in 10 years, you got to understand he's backing it up with a big brain, right? And you can go at him in any way and he'll, because he's thought about it more than you have. And I wouldn't argue with Peter Zeihan on that anymore, and I never have. Right? I've said from the start, Peter Zeihan's opinion of China made sense to me. I think it still makes sense, and I follow it, just like Michael Schellenberger's explanation of Apocalypse Never and San Francisco were excellent pieces on those problems. But again, we're in the field now of real life economics, and the idea that Bitcoin even elicits humbleness is lost on them. They're not even at that level yet, right? One of the people that I admire the most in Bitcoin is Bitstein, right? So Bitstein, who helped start the Austrian or the Satoshi Institute with Pierre Rochard, who I worked with at Kraken. He's one of the people that helped me destroy my ego in the earliest days of Bitcoin, because when I got started 10 years ago in 2013, like everybody, I thought I was the first one to think of it this way, right? But here was this fucking kid who was in college. I was still in my 20s, but this kid was even, younger than me, who had already thought of everything. And I was like, well, what the fuck am I doing here? Like, how does this guy, how was someone thought everything already and I didn't even heard of Bitcoin? How did this happen? And right away, you have to just take the humble pill. And there's no choice, right? Because someone has thought of it before. You're not the newest person. You're not the smartest person in this game. And because in the end, it is pretty simple. And the innovations, insights that came out of it were so clear that they've resonated over time, right? Simple things create simple explanations, which have very appropriate real world implications. And you didn't need to be a genius to see this stuff. You just had to have the courage and be there early enough to see it. And that's where the humbleness came from, right? So you realized right away there was not going to be a place for the first person to think of something, right? I remember one of the first core developers that I met, and this would have been in 2015, and one of the smartest I've ever met, a guy named Johnny Dilly. And Johnny Dilly was working for Blockstream at the time, and he wrote one of the important early papers on homomorphic encryption and what it could mean, and when it was still, thinking of experimental things we could do with Bitcoin. And so Johnny Dilly, amazingly, was a core developer, and he worked for early Pantera. And if you know the order of, this is Wall Street stuff I only learned when I worked on Wall Street, but if you don't know Dan Moorhead, so you don't need to know Dan Moorhead for now. Dan Moorhead is the guy who runs Pantera. It's a crypto fund, and they're heavily involved in Bitcoin. But Dan Moorhead comes from the world of the Tiger Cubs, Tiger Global Management. And they were one of the earliest, most important 1990s hedge funds, and helped set the stage for all of the financialization that came afterwards. And so anyone who worked and came out of that world became known as a Tiger Cub, because they had so much influence, a bit like the PayPal mafia, a little bit like the PayPal mafia, but just for Wall Street stuff. So not stupid people, by the way, right? Not stupid people. We can denigrate all we want Wall Street and its historic effects, but remember, the smartest people in the world went to Wall Street for a reason. And these were not idiots. So really smart people. This was before they were even doubting it. But it's normal. The best and brightest will go to where you make the most money. And that's what we want to stop in Bitcoin. We don't want the best and brightest going to Wall Street anymore. Right? We talk about that on the show all the time. We want the best and brightest making chairs, right? Making stuff, things we could use, right? Making them better. Doing what Peter Zeihan said shouldn't happen, right? Which is capitalism making the cost of things less, because and our purchasing power greater, because efficiencies get shared across the system. So from there on, right? From there on, there's no more excuse for that stuff, right? There's just no more excuse. So Zeihan, Schellenberger, these guys, a lot like what Alan Farrington mentioned here, right? They are trapped by their professions, their egos, and these things. But now look at what's changing, right? We'll mention a few things really quickly here. So the first one, look at the case of Jordan Peterson, right? Jordan Peterson now going before this college of psychologists, needs social media training, and he's sharing all of their observations, and they look really silly, right? They look really silly. They look absurd. And this is going to continue. We predicted on the show the minute they brought these charges against them that it wasn't going to go well for the College of Psychologists, right? And it's already brought up a whole bunch of conversation around getting rid of licensing, government licensing. So the FEE, so the Freedom of Economic, it's a magazine, FEE, today has an article, Jordan Peterson's license fiasco highlights why government licensing should be abolished. And you go through it, and it's a tool for censorship, they say, and that there are other ways we can get out of government licensing. I have a few other stories along this line today. But we're gonna skip them and just go right to where I think this is gonna play out and why it's gonna play out for Bitcoin in an interesting way. So think of this psychology thing for a second, right? You've got this board that's now criticizing Jordan Peterson, probably the world's most famous psychologist at this point, right? Especially for men's health and all these other things. I'm not saying he's the best psychologist. I'm just saying he's probably the most famous at this point, right? I can't think of anyone offhand more famous than him. Whether or not it's just for men or others, it doesn't matter. He's very famous. So the most famous psychologist is getting criticized by the board. Well, what else is happening in the world about psychology? Here's the future, guys. It's before us. There's a report, and they get it wrong. They get it wrong, but also in Forbes, right? So a bunch of psychologists were, and they did an experiment, right? A bunch of psychologists this past autumn were using the Chat GPT to increase their throughput in dealing with patients, right? So patients would tell them what's going on. They would create their plan by using the Chat GPT software, right? So the AI stuff. So they would get the AI, and then they would say to the person, they would just share it with the person, right? And it was working. So, but here was where the experiment became interesting. They told those people afterwards that it was the AI that did it. right? So all these people reported the advice being useful, but here's the interesting observation from the study. The moment they found out it was an AI, they discredited the information and didn't care anymore and just said, it's no good, right? So what does that tell you? Now, this story that people are talking about, it says, AI will never be used for psychology now, right? It's just going to do art. People don't want advice from an AI, right? Well, and they found out, they asked why, right? So why? A bunch of different answers. My answer, maybe I'm wrong, my answer is I think these people just wanted, I think most people want empathy. They just want another person to listen to them, right? Loneliness is one of the biggest problems we have in the world today, right? People are really lonely across the board, everywhere. And loneliness can cause all kinds of mental health problems. So you get these folks now when they hear that their psychologist actually used an AI, they're a little bit insulted, right? I don't know about this. Will that ever go away? Well, in the end, I think the story gets it backwards. I think the predictions that this study and the news that reported on the study saying, basically the conclusion that AI can't help in psychology and is actually an indication of the limits of AI, I think is wrong, right? I think they got it wrong. Once the AI understands how to say that it cares about you, right? Because that's what the people sort of thought, right? That because it's from an AI, they don't really care, which makes me say what people really want is the empathy. They want to just say what their problem is to another person who has ears and who cares, right? Usually that's enough. Honestly, that's enough, right? What do they say is one of the best things you can do in counseling? Just listen. Sometimes you just need to listen. And that's enough, right? Someone being able to tell all of their stuff, work it out, all these things, and then get a bit of advice, right? But what do psychologists have over an AI? Do they really care? It's a job to them too, right? It's a job to them too. Once it's over, I mean, they want you to do better, right? But once it's over, they go back to their life, right? I got family, getting health treatments and all that, and I tell them all the time, like, do you think they care more about you than yourself? If you have a disagreement with your doctor about something, bring it up, right? Don't worry about these doctors who say, "Oh, did you Google that?" Right? Everyone's so worried because doctors say, "I'm sick of people coming in my office Googling shit." Right? Well, do you care more about the health of your patient than the patient themselves? No way. It's not possible. So, how much longer before the AI understands, and before someone programs the AI to understand that it needs to show? What if the AI just said, "I care about you. I care. I care." Here's the thing. Humans won't know the difference in the end, because by them saying they care, they can actually back it up by 100% attention on you. 100%. There's no conflicting ego in the AI. Nothing like that. Nothing like that. So all this mental health around the world, all of these troubles, what is the result? I think, and my book, Satoshi Wedding Murders, is about this. I think everyone's best friend, best friend is going to be an AI. Everyone's partner is going to be an AI. And when you hear things even around Bitcoin, like Bitcoin's hard to manage, it's dangerous, well, it's going to solve that too. Because Bitcoin is simple for an AI. In fact, it's the only money it could use. It can't use dollars. It can't use fucking gold. It can only use Bitcoin. There's no other money possible for AI. And in my book, AI is your wallet, right? That you're not going to lose your Bitcoin. The AI is going to help you manage it. It's going to help you transact. It's going to help do what you need to do and not make a mistake. Your AI is going to be the thing that's there for you all the time. And you can put it down. You can say whatever you want, but the AI is going to be with you. And the AI in the end, right? You see the College of Psychologists telling Jordan Peterson and right, the order, the structure. Look at what's happening in the economy. Like, how many of these top-down systems are we going to continue to appreciate? You get this case in Texas right now where a guy tried to rob a taqueria, and a guy, don't rob a place in Texas. Most people are armed. The guy is sitting in the booth, shoots him. Right now, the police want to go after the guy who shot him because he just left after he killed the robber. It's all on video. He was just dining. Robber came in with a mask, turned his back. The guy shot him, dead. Walked out of the restaurant. He's gone. Right, but now the police want to see him. Right, they want to investigate what he did. Right, so. You get Michael Malice today talking about, well, it's time to just get rid of police and courts, right? They're not going to help us for any of this stuff. Now, imagine a world where AI is there AI can basically distribute justice instantly in real time, right? And if this guy had been eating and his little eyeball was next to him and saw and recorded what happened, right? That eyeball can just send information and people would know. There'd be no reason to call on this guy. There'd be no legal system there to try and help him, right? So you're getting lots of folks already saying, well, you know, the structures that we have are just too prone to human error. And psychology being one of the most obvious. This is those unverifiable facts that Alan Farrington mentioned when he was discussing Eric Weinstein, and I mentioned when I was talking about Zeihan and Schellenberger. So, you know, these folks, and Zeihan and Schellenberger are going to have their own AI balls. They're going to have their own eyeballs. And as I continue to believe, it will be the method by which humans cultivate their third eye. Our eyeballs, our AI are going to be like our third eyes, right? They're going to be the thing that helps us cure our loneliness, come together more as people, come together more as a one race on the world, right? We're all going to have our best friend. We're all going to have our AI. It's going to help us protect us from fake news. Now, we see today people are complaining there's the chat GPT criticizes Hindu gods, but won't talk about Islam and won't talk about Christianity. So what's going to end up happening is they are going to become, you're going to train your own AI. It's going to be like a Tamadoji, those Japanese little things, right? You're going to get like an infantile AI that will love you. like a generic kind, and it's going to learn. It's going to learn, and it's going to help you. And it's going to be the only tech we need, right? It's going to be our phone. It's going to be our interface with government, our interface, whatever government's left, our interface with money, and we'll live our physical, corporal lives as we always have. It'll be less tech. There's going to be less tech as a result of this. Less around us, no more apps, right? Do you think an AI needs 12 messaging apps built in? Does it need a Telegram, Signal, Slack, email, phone, text, WhatsApp, all? No. It needs one messaging capacity. I say to my AI, hey, tell my mother, I'm going to be late coming back, right? Or tell my friend I'm not going to be there, right? Or tell my friend I'm early. Tell my friend I'm there. Tell my friend I want to see them. Whatever. All possible with your AI. And so what I think is going to happen is people like Zeihan, who are held down by their egos, right? What is the third eye all about, right? Third eye often is about denuding your ego. You can't cultivate a third eye if you put your ego in front of it all the time. It's not possible, right? And that's why it's so important that Bitcoiners are these types of alchemists, right? In a way, Zeihan was too, and Schellenberger too, right? They took unpopular opinions and found a way to communicate those to the world by making predictions, and we're looking like their predictions are coming true. Therefore, their opinions are of higher value, right? But beware the person who is known for this, right? Like Alex Berenson. I love Alex Berenson. Right? He's great. Alan, what the Berenson guy, right? Alex Berenson? I don't remember. The guy on Twitter who got kicked off because he was all about COVID, this and that, right? So Berenson, right? I think we need Berensons in the world, but he's wrong about everything. He's the most wrong person about COVID there is. He's just wrong. He's never been right about any of it, right? I don't want to kick him off Twitter. I like that people listen to him and follow. You need people who are going to rabble rouse and say controversial things and say things that are different. We would be in no position as a society if we didn't have people like Berenson. But he's wrong. And in the end, he's someone who might have, I'm mind reading here, but he's someone who might have gotten a kick out of being right about a thing where he was in the minority and is now that guy, right? He's always going to go against the majority because he's known for being right once. Or I don't know if he was ever right, but he's been known for being right against popular opinion. Now, the problem with that, and Zeihan and Schellenberger are in the same boat, right, is you're kind of known for that. And you've got to play to that audience, right? If you're just saying something like, well, maybe, I don't know, you can't do that, right? So everyone's saying, everybody's saying, better to not have an opinion than say something stupid like Zeihan and Schellenberger. Indeed, but ego won't allow it, right? Ego says you must have an opinion. But the eyeballs, the AI, is going to help us get away from that. And we're not going to have such an impetus and be driven by ego. Like if Zeihan would have done that interview with his eyeball, and his eyeball would have been like, oh, you're wrong about that, Peter. Monetary expansion is not a thing. Whatever you just discussed is not real. It would have had a big change, because hearing it from your own friend who knows you is going to make things different, right? So I wonder when we will be able to afford enough RAM to run these models locally. Yeah, that'll be one of the big keys here is the processing power. Because even as I understand the subsidy to run ChatGPT and Stable Diffusion and all these, I've been using them all lately, is really expensive. And so it will have to be locally. In my book, we've perfected quantum processing, so that's how these things are powered. So I use a pretty interesting device in order to have a quantum processor. I make it use the Heisenberg uncertainty principle as a sort of a way to frame what they do, and to get over the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. So the location of the electron around the atom is to have faith in God and us as their creators. It's the God constant. It's the only thing that allows them to actually have a synthetic thought. So it was a fun, could be something like that, right? Defina says, good morning. Finally, AV is a 10. Excellent, guys. I'm very happy to hear that. The sound was good. I'm going to re-listen, but was it clear? Did it sound like it was coming off the iPad? Because I used a different mic today. I chose it, but I think it good. Like the really big models that take a few terabytes to train. Again, I think we're going to have to wait for a little more Metcalfe's law and a little more stuff to happen. I think the AI is going to take a bit of time. I don't know the time frame, frankly. Don't. All right, team. So glad it worked. You know what it might have been? I changed the browser today. I was using that stupid browser that comes with Apple because it was the only one that would allow me to use my iPhone as the camera. But finally, I figured out how to do it on Chrome today. So I ran everything off of Chrome and a new mic, and looks like it worked. So I'll keep doing it this way. Probably won't work again tomorrow. I have the whiteboard's coming. My problem is I still don't have a car here. They're all sold out for another few days because it's still holidays on the island. And they only had 3 colors at the store that I made it to yesterday. And I can't really operate without black and orange. I can, but it's not great. So I'm going to find black and orange. So we might not have a board tomorrow morning. I was planning on having the boards tomorrow morning, bringing the board back. Today would have been a good one. I was going to do a third eye, but I couldn't even, it's just not enough colors. When you're doing a board, the color, you wouldn't believe it, but the colors actually end up doing a lot to make them useful. So I'm going to try. It's Sunday here, Sunday everywhere. It's Sunday, and here they don't open stores really on a Sunday. It's pretty old-fashioned. Groceries and a few things, but it's not wide. Things are not widely open. So I don't know if I can find the markers today. I think I can find them tomorrow, but not before the show. Chromium is open source. Chrome is not. Okay, thanks, Brandon. Maybe I will try that one. I know, and thanks for everyone who's been trying to help this. I know it's been difficult and annoying. It sucks. I wish technology was easier. But thank you. I'm going to keep at it. I'm going to keep trying to get it. I want it to be easy and replicatable, but good. Right? If I can get it easy, replicatable, and high quality, we're ready to go. And we will be broadcasting. So it's been a few months this way. I am going to start broadcasting on the Bitcoin Magazine channels once I lock the stuff in. So our audience will go pretty big real quick. And we're going to get there. I just want to make sure we're not turning people off, right? All of you guys who've come in these first few months, it's been wonderful. We're not going to change anything, right? We're not going to change anything. except we're going to grow to the channels that we have, and it'll still be airing on my own personal channels, but we're going to use the channels we've cultivated over time, and put some more stuff out. Same content, nothing's changing. Just want to make sure we don't put off people who aren't really interested in this longer form, deeper type of content with bad quality, right? We don't want bad quality to be the reason why people don't come in and enjoy these nice coffees and conversations with everyone. So it's not happening yet. So nothing's changing ever. You're not really going to notice. It'll just be available on more channels, and there ought to be a lot more people watching in the chat. All right, team. You have a great Sunday. I missed a few of the items we were supposed to talk about on the agenda today. They are all sort of along the lines of top-down structures suffering. We'll probably get to them tomorrow. I can bring a few of them in. All right, team. Peace.